A lot for joining us live on Fox 10 Midday. As far as the investigation goes, where do you think stand right now?
So the PIO sent out this morning, and you should have received it, that we've identified our deceased victim as Jatorius Reeves. And Mr. Reeves was 24 years old, and I think it's a great time for me just to insert and say to the family that we offer our condolences. Certainly our prayers are with the family as they grieve through this time. I've always had the sentiment it doesn't matter what people are involved in. A loss of life is unfortunate for anybody, and especially for a 24-year-old young man that hasn't even started his life.
And as you mentioned last night when you were talking with Lee, this seemed to stem from a dispute between two groups. Can you share some more detail on that?
Right. So, loosely speaking, we can say that this is affiliated with what we call gang activity, okay? It's an altercation between two individuals, and it's an unfortunate event, but two individuals that couldn't resolve their problem without resorting to gunfire. And of course, I've always said from the very beginning that even though, there was gunfire at play, the danger in this, and unfortunately we've seen it New Year's Eve, is that when we indiscriminately start shooting and spraying into a crowd, obviously this is what happens, and we have innocent bystanders that are affected by it.
And as for those innocent bystanders, I know you spoke last night, you mentioned that 3 of them were still in the hospital. Any update on their conditions?
Yeah, so their conditions has not changed. One of those individuals is our shooter, and we've been able to quickly identify who that person is. We're not naming that individual at this time because the investigation is very fluid. There's a lot that we're still trying to learn, so hopefully in the coming days we'll be able to get that information to you. Out of the 3 individuals that are in the local hospitals recovering, one of them is still in critical condition, and our prayers and thoughts are with the family of that individual.
And as for the suspect that you all have in custody, still getting treated at the hospital, you mentioned yesterday that when he's out, he will be charged with murder. Is there any timeline on when he'll be released from the hospital?
No, that is solely at the discretion of the medical doctors involved with treating this individual. But once he is released, he'll be transported to Metro Jail and booked on the charge of murder.
And as for, like you mentioned, with the innocent bystanders, just how, frustrating is this that these two groups decided to handle whatever this issue was in crowded downtown on New Year's Eve like that?
Yeah, so I know you said groups. So what we're talking about is 2 individuals that are loosely related with gang activity. I'm appalled. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm sickened by the violence. We had in attendance at the downtown event 12,000, roughly 500 people. And to put it in perspective, 12,498 people showed up to have a good time and enjoy the celebration of the new year. And I had 2 individuals that decided that they would ruin that for the masses. That being said, I think you have 2 groups of individuals down there. You had your typical Friday and Saturday night patrons of the downtown entertainment district, but you also had a large segment of those attendees that were family that came down there to go to the Bienville Square, to go to Royal Street to enjoy the moon pie drop. I will say that my sentiment is that the vast majority of people didn't know that the incident had occurred until the next morning. But nonetheless, we had a large contingency of officers. We had 25% more officers down there New Year's Eve than we did last year for the sole reason that we wanted people to feel safe. The incident is unfortunate, but I am determined that I am not going to allow it to overshadow all the good things, in particular the way of crime reduction that we have seen over the last 12 months. Today is not the time to discuss that, but in the coming weeks and months, we'll certainly have that conversation.
Speaking of previous conversations, I know you've spoken a lot with Fox 10 News reporter Brendan Kirby about Glock switches, and you mentioned last night that this is another one of those incidents. Can you shed some more light on that?
Yeah, I can. So one of the guns that we recovered from the scene had a switch on it, and if you're not familiar with that, it's just simply a device that manipulates the weapon to shoot from a semi-automatic to an automatic weapon. And so, for example, you could have a 15-round magazine with 15 bullets in it in less than a second, and you can empty that magazine. In essence, that's kind of what happened New Year's Eve. And, it's a weapon that for many reasons is illegal. That's why we don't allow automatic weapons in society. You heard the mayor say, if I can elaborate, about the task force, and I think it's important to note that the mayor's kind of taken the charge on this with the task force, and it just simply is an interagency agreement between the mayor's office, the federal and the local state prosecutors, as well as various agencies and components within the Department of Criminal Investigations, our intelligence unit, certainly our cyber unit, and then working also with our federal partners, such in this case would be either the FBI or the ATF, to see if we can garner charges on the shooter for simply possessing the switch. I will say that as a part of the task force, as the mayor's office has already reached out to some of the local delegation, state representatives, we don't have here in Alabama a state equivalent charge to a device such as a switch that would manipulate a weapon. And this would be one law that would certainly be welcome in helping, where we can immediately take a person into custody and start them through that process, in addition to leveraging additional federal charges with our federal partners.
I know you mentioned on one of the weapons were all the weapons that were used in the shooting recovered?
So we believe that we recovered several. I think it would just suffice to say I'll say several weapons at this time, and we do believe we have the weapons that were involved in the incident.
Okay, is it known how many rounds were fired during this?
Well, we have a pretty good idea, but as you can imagine, there's information that has to be corroborated, and a lot of times we use that information to be able to corroborate evidence without having to get into specifics. If I gave that information out there, it could contaminate witness testimony, and so we certainly don't want to get into that.
Right, and I know you mentioned the task force has been working on this. Like you mentioned, the mayor said that there was that meeting yesterday. I guess what are the next steps for that task force going forward?
Well, the task force simply is for this particular scenario is twofold. It's one, when the mayor gave his statement, we had still not named and identified the shooter. But the task force plays two roles. One was to identify all those that are responsible in this particular incident downtown on New Year's Eve. And the second part was to reach out with our state delegation and state representatives to see if we can find some commonality or common ground on additional laws that we can use to put people behind bars with mandated sentences.
And going forward, like you mentioned,